Section 14, Chapter 9, Part 1 of the Life and Adventures of Kit Carson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. The Life and Adventures of Kit Carson by DeWitt C. Peters. Section 14, Chapter 9, Part 1. Kit Carson concludes to become a farmer. He is joined in the enterprise by a friend. They build a ranch on the Cimarron River. Descriptions of Mexican customs and country. Fremont once more at Bent's Fort. Express sent for Kit Carson to join the expedition as guide. The ranch sold and the departure. The third expedition and its explorations. Difficulties with the Mexican Californians. General Castro's orders to leave the country. Determination to fight. Fremont goes to Lawson's Fort. Fremont and his men encounter 1,000 Indians. The battle and the victory. The news that the war had been declared between the United States and Mexico reaches Fremont. Lieutenant Gillespie rescued from the Indians. 3 of the party killed in the night by Indians. The savages repulsed. The burial of comrades. In the early spring of 1845, Kit Carson, after weighing the various occupations which presented, decided to become a farmer. One of his mountaineer friends, Mr. Richard Owens, came to the same conclusion. Together they talked over their plans, and concluded that it would be to them, at least, newness of life to be domiciled in their own houses. The 2 hunters carefully marked out their plans, and then set to work, with a will for success, to carry them into execution. A very short time enabled them to choose a farming site, because their knowledge of the country enabled them to see all of its desirable localities, as it were, at a glance. They decided to purchase a tract of wild land situated on the little Cimarron River, and improve it. Their arrangements were soon made. Tools and implements, stock and animals, provisions and necessaries all procured. With the services of some laborers hired by them, they were soon engaged actively preparing their land for the reception of seed. The spot which they had selected was 45 miles east of Taos. They commenced the enterprise by building some small huts. These afforded both themselves and the Mexican laborers a comfortable lodgment. They sowed a considerable quantity of grain, and prepared timber almost sufficient to build good substantial houses. Their vigorously prosecuted labors began to show evident results, and in the prospect, it was clearly apparent that another year would serve to give them profitable reward for their enterprise. It seems appropriate at this point that we should enable the reader to look upon and judge of the farming country and habits of New Mexico, their markets, and some of the manners and customs of the people who dwell in cities. The town of Taos affords a fair sample of the markets, and as Kit Carson has many times been exhibited to the reader at that place, it is very proper that we should describe it. The town of Taos is located in a valley called by the same name. The town consists of a series of villages which are scattered, and are known to the Mexicans by various names. The main village is called Fernandez de Taos, and is located near the center of the valley, on a high plateau of ground. The buildings here, as indeed in all the towns of New Mexico, are constructed of adobes, and are 1 story high, with what is usually known as flat roofs. These houses are huddled together without much regard being paid to streets. The main attraction of the town is the plaza, where all the business, such as marketing, etc., is carried on. It is here that the stores are located, and, on a fête day, or in business hours, it is thronged with Mexicans, Americans, and Indians. Among these there is a large percentage of idlers. The houses are mostly covered with a white material, which is either chalk or lime. The church is the largest building in the town, and is a rough specimen of architecture, which is rudely finished within. It has a flat sounding bell, propped up in a sort of a belfry. To make a noise on this, a piece of iron or several stones are used, and, when an attempt at chiming is made, it is very laughable. The figures representing saints, and even the altar, are a strange compound of imitation. On the respective days set apart by the Catholic Church for worship, marriages and fête services are carried on with a great attempt at pomp, but, under the circumstances, they leave no lasting impression of grandeur, save on the inhabitants, who have beheld nothing beyond their own country. The dignitary most respected in these towns is the padre, or priest, who is looked upon as sacred; and when so inclined, this class of men have the power of accomplishing much good; but, oftentimes, they pervert this power, setting bad examples in their mode of life, and offering wicked counsel. However, under the management of the present bishop, who is a very exemplary man, these things are being changed. The old priests of New Mexico were formerly educated in Old Mexico. Their information was very imperfect, and their minds were contracted down to extreme narrowness, from want of observation; hence, they were the means of retarding the natural progress of the people. It cannot be denied but that the Catholic religion has been the pioneer system in the far West, and that, in the hands of good and pure men, it has done much praiseworthy work, and has set an example which other creeds might and ought to follow. The valley of Taos is bounded on all sides by lofty mountains, which are but continuations of the rocky chain. The boundaries of this valley are very irregular, both in the course they take and in their altitudes. The valley is about 30 miles wide and some 15 miles long. The ground has the appearance, at first sight, of being a plain, but, on closer observation, is found to contain many ravines, and to bear the appearance of being undulating. To the west side of it rolls the Rio Grande, which cuts, for most of the way, through a deep and impassable, for fording purposes, channel. In the valley there are but few, if any, trees, which fact gives the villages a barren look. The mountains about are covered with timber, which is not generally of the first quality for building purposes. The number of people included within the limits of this valley it is difficult to estimate, but about 10,000 would include every living soul. The occupation of the people is farming. Raising horses, cattle, and sheep is carried on to a certain extent, but most of the large herds of these animals owned in this town are kept at ranches situated at more distant points, where grass is to be had in abundance, and those retained about the villages are only kept for immediate use. The reason for this is found in the fact that most of this valley is not under cultivation, but is covered with sage bushes. It is around the skirts of the mountains that the only valuable grass is found. The people, as a general thing, are quite poor, but, as they find a ready market through the military posts for their produce, they manage to realize some money, and thus live quite comfortably, in contrast with their former destitute condition under the government of Old Mexico. Some of the inhabitants might be said to be rich, though but few of this class own $10,000 worth of property. It is with great labor that the people of Taos bring their crops to perfection, as it is necessary to irrigate the soil, unless the season, which is rarely the fact, is favorable in furnishing rains to them. There are no fences to divide one man's possessions from another's, but, by common law, they furnish shepherds to guard their flocks and cattle and keep them from trespassing. The climate is very severe during the winter season, but in the summer it is delightful. The health of this community is wonderfully good. Indeed, the only severe diseases they have to contend against are brought on by vices. Excluding small pox and the lesser complaints among young children, no epidemics are known. The country is so elevated and inland, that the air is dry and salubrious, and the dew point is rarely reached so as to amount to anything. It may be well to add here, that for the consumptive patient in the early stages of the disease, there is no such climate in the world to visit as that of New Mexico; but as a matter of course he must vary his location with the changes of temperature, being governed by the seasons. The winter in Taos is too severe for him. Then he must go south, towards or even to El Paso, where it is congenial to his disease. I prophesy that some day our eternal continent will be the Mecca for pilgrims with this disease. The dress of the New Mexican is the same as in Old Mexico. The peasant wears his sombrero and his everlasting blanket, which serves him as a coat and a covering by night. He rarely has but one suit of clothes, which are put on new and worn until they are of no further use. By amalgamating with the Americans, they are gradually changing their style of dress. The buckskin pants, which were characteristically cut and ornamented, are giving way to the ordinary cloth ones of his white companions. It is so with the blanket, which is being shed for the coat; and again, this is true with the moccasin, which is being replaced by the leathern shoe. The dress of the female has undergone the same alteration. From almost a state of nudity, they have been raised to a position from which they look upon silk and satin with a connoisseur's eye. When New Mexico was part and parcel of the domain of Old Mexico, Taos was the seat of much smuggling from the United States, and many an apparent pack of grain drawn into the town has been nothing less than packages of domestic goods, the duties upon which, when introduced in the legal way, were enormous. Hence the white men engaged in this business, when successful, met with ample rewards for their labors. The frontiers were like the olden sea coasts. The Mexicans kept out scores of custom house officers to guard their frontiers, but the shrewd foreigners many times were able to escape them; at others they were so fortunate as to find that a bribe would answer as well. An old trick was to have a double bottom to a wagon, and in the vacant space thus formed were stowed valuable shawls and such light articles as would meet a sure and remunerative sale. Sometimes the goods were brought near the frontiers and then hidden in the ground until a favorable opportunity offered to steal them into the country. When there was great danger that these secreted goods would be discovered, the smugglers would so arrange a keg of powder with the loaded pistol pointing at it, with strings running to the shrubbery near by, so as to cause it to explode and kill the searchers should the bushes about be disturbed. One old smuggler once fixed things in this manner, but performed his task too well, for, on going to remove his property, he came very near blowing himself up, as the mine was sprung and he was thrown in the air, but miraculously escaped. Many of the adventures of these men would be interesting, but they are too voluminous to be embodied in our work. The valley of Taos is well watered by mountain streams which flow into the Rio Grande. On one of these creeks, and near the mountains, to the east of Fernandez de Taos, is located an Indian pueblo, which is very interesting to the traveler. Its houses are built one on top of another until a sort of pyramid is formed. The people enter their respective domiciles through the roofs, which form a kind of steps. At the foot of this queer building there is a church, and around, as scenery is very picturesque, as the whole is bounded on one side by a gap in the mountains, while on the other is the open valley. This band of Indians at first offered great resistance and fought with much bravery against the United States, but now they are counted among its most faithful allies, and are great in their admiration of Kit Carson. The farming utensils of the New Mexicans are rude in the extreme, but the agricultural implements of the Anglo Saxon are slowly replacing these articles. The old plough, as frequently used at the present time by the New Mexicans, is indeed a curiosity, and it probably was invented in the earliest times. It consists of one piece of timber, which is crooked the proper shape by nature. The end of this is sharpened, and on it is fastened a single piece of iron, which has an attempt at a sharp point. The force to propel this farming implement is attached in the usual way, with but few modifications. Oxen are always employed in this labor, and their yoke is fastened after the Egyptian fashion to their horns instead of by bows. In breaking up the hard prairies, this plough had a difficult task to perform, and was often broken. but, by the assistance of men employed in clearing obstacles, such as sage bushes, etc., the task was imperfectly gone through with. The Mexican axe is another curious tool, which resembles as much the common pick of our laborers as it does the axe used by American woodsmen. The sickle is used in harvesting to this day in these parts, performing the duties of the scythe, the cradle, etc. The most remarkable sight of all is the Mexican cart, the noise of which, when moving, can be heard on a still day at a great distance. The wheels of this vehicle are at least 1 foot thick, and consist of pieces of solid wood which are pegged together and made to approach a circle by the best judgment of the eye, without the aid of measuring. These wheels are very heavy, and when rolling they go by jerks, owing to their want of proportion, etc. The body of the cart, as are all of its parts, is made of soft wood, and seems to be constructed for weight and strength instead of beauty. The whole affair, when complete, is almost a load by itself; hence it is capable of carrying but a small cargo. The grain that Mexicans of New Mexico grow is corn and wheat, and it is on these crops that they depend for their support. In converting this grain into flour, they either use the old water mill, which is very primitive in its construction, or else, when they are not near by, they make use of 2 stones and grind it by hand. Their common diet is a sort of thick gruel made of corn meal, wheat bread, eggs, peas, beans, pumpkins, which latter articles they roast, and then break holes into them, and with a spoon dip out the contents as they are required; and, to finish the catalogue, sometimes meat, game, and milk. The fruits found in New Mexico are not various, and are mostly confined to apples, peaches, plums, and grapes. These latter are truly superior, and are raised in the greatest abundance in the south of the territory, where, also, they manufacture a very pleasant red wine, which goes by the name of El Paso wine. We take the manners and customs of the people of Taos as a good type to judge of the manners and customs of the New Mexicans, for the town is second only in size in this territory to Santa Fé. The inhabitants of New Mexico, notwithstanding their poverty and neglect, owing to their remote locality, are perhaps as happy and contented as any community in the world. They are not over celebrated for their chastity or virtue, and, to the disgrace of the white man, they have not been assisted by him in these cardinal principles; but time will work wonder on this score, and teach the immorality of such proceedings. Their great source of enjoyment consists in dancing, and hence the fandango is always looked for as a time when dull care would be dispelled. A grand fandango is the event of a New Mexican's life. These affairs are gotten up sometimes for charitable purposes, when the money gathered in the sale of refreshments is distributed to the poor, or else they are started by individuals to make a little money out of. In a town the size of Taos, during the winter season, hardly a night passes by without a dance. Written invitations in Spanish are freely circulated about the town in order to entrap the strangers, while the inhabitants are invited by other means. The music consists of a high strung violin and a species of guitar. This is perambulated about the town. The players perform light dancing tunes and accompany the music with their voices, making up the words as they go along. This music is learned entirely by ear, and is transmitted from one generation to another through the means of these fandangos. The vocal music is anything but harmonious to the ear, but some of the airs, when played on the instruments, are rather pleasing, and one, on hearing them, finds himself often humming them afterwards. The powers of music are nowhere better illustrated than among these people. Their ready ear quickly catches a new tune, and it is not uncommon to hear in a Mexican town a senorita giving vent to a negro melody, or a favorite polka which she has heard some American sing or whistle. At Santa Fé there are several noted players on the violin and harp who cannot read a word of music, yet they can play on their respective instruments with taste and skill. A New Mexican female, in preparing herself for these balls, is very particular in making, by the aid of cosmetics, her complexion as light as possible. She first uses a red berry which stains her face almost to the color of brick and renders her excessively ugly. This she leaves on several hours, when it is washed off and chalk is applied so freely as to render it easily perceptible. In her toilet she is also very particular, as far as the exterior is concerned, and in the fandango the stranger's eyes are taken by storm by the gaudy colors he sees rather than the neatness of the dress. The floor of the dancing room is usually the mother earth, which is frequently sprinkled with water to keep down the dust. The men are in their everyday habiliments, with the addition of any clean thing they may chance to possess, but usually they are a motley crowd, a glance at whom at first leaves the impression that they are far from being refined. Except when dancing, they cling to their blankets, and at the least pause in the proceedings they at once draw forth the materials and make their cigarettos. Both men and women indulge in these articles, and oftentimes when the dance is in full blast the air of the room is densely charged with the smell of the burning punchi, a species of tobacco, making it anything but agreeable. The women are seated on benches along the walls of the building, by themselves, while the men congregate in knots together. On the commencement of a figure, the Mexican selects his partner, and notifies her that she is his choice by making a signal to her with his hand, when she takes her position in the dance. The eyes and the latent smile on the face of the dark eyed senorita shows she is enjoying herself. The men exhibit their pleasure in a more boisterous manner, that is, by occasionally whooping and cracking jokes. Gambling is carried on under the same roof, and in this both men and women join, as long as their money lasts. [Footnote: The game most frequently played is monte.] Then they make room for others who are anxious to try their fortunes. This vice is truly of a national character, and so given to it are these people, that they will part with anything to support their appetite. To their credit it can be said that the New Mexican women indulge but sparingly in alcoholic liquor, but the men are prone to the intoxicating cup. They often anticipate the evil effects of drink, and it is not unfrequent to see a New Mexican assuming the airs of a drunken man after 2 or 3 mouthfuls of aguardiente. The spirit of the ball is carried on well into the short hours of night, when all parties depart for their homes. Intoxication, that curse to all men, is playing havoc with this innocent amusement of the people, and causing these scenes to terminate in riot, and often bloodshed, especially when the jealousy of the white blood is raised at some imagined insult, and then, as is always the case, the two races come in fierce contact. It is hoped that by the aid of schools and education these things may be ameliorated, but they cannot be cured. The mischief is too deeply rooted. We have thus endeavored to give the reader a view of the people among whom Kit Carson had determined to become a farmer. But he was not destined to finish and perfect his plans. Near the conclusion of the second exploring expedition, and at the time when Kit Carson took his departure from the party, Colonel Fremont had received a promise from him to the effect that he would join, as guide, any party of discovery for the further exploration of the Rocky Mountains which he, Colonel Fremont, should command. During the active duties of a farmer's life, and just as Kit Carson had brought his new enterprise into working order, an expressman from Colonel Fremont arrived at his ranch, bearing dispatches to Carson. The purport of these dispatches was to remind Kit Carson of his promise, to inform him of the organization of a third expedition, and to appoint a place where Kit Carson might find his old commander. The express found Carson in the midst of so many cares and anxieties concerning his new project, that it became a very difficult matter for him to keep his word. But the sacrifice of pecuniary interest was but a slight consideration with Kit, when weighed in the balance against his promise. He knew that his promise had not been either lightly given or received. Colonel Fremont, by it, had the first right to his time and energies, and had formed his expectations accordingly, and Kit lost therefore no time in making preparations to satisfy these expectations by reporting himself at the appointed place of meeting, ready for the march. Chapter 9 Part 1